Hmm. So welcome everyone to the third talk in the Experiencing No Self series. So today we're going to be talking about emotions, sort of transforming emotions into liberation. And I've added this one in because of some of the questions that came up around emotions. When we were talking about thoughts and, seeing thoughts as not self, seeing the impersonal and insubstantial nature of thoughts. Well, the same really goes for emotions. Last week was, people asked where, kind of emotions come from. And really they come from thoughts. It's a physical manifestation of, for the most part, with a few exceptions, of manifestation of thoughts. So, really, if we see our thoughts as not self or no self, then by definition, emotions will follow. But of course, we do get caught up in emotions. It happens. And, even someone who is directly seen no self through and through will still have emotions arise, right? It's part of being human. The difference would be in terms of not being caught up in them. So we'll talk a bit about that. So I'm going to kind of go through, a way that we could practice with emotions that kind of, kind of the way you would most often hear insight meditation teacher talk about emotions. But I'd also like to just point out that there's kind of a more direct path. If you see emotions for what they are, as impersonal, no self, you just see that they're just arising without any doing on your part, without your consent. You can see their impersonal nature, the selflessness of them. You're by definition not caught up in them. So that's really a more direct way. You kind of start with that view. And then you get tastes of it. You can say, oh yeah, look, when I'm not buying into the emotions, they can just flow through there. I can just let them be. I can just be with them. And you get kind of tastes of that. So you really start with that view, and then you just kind of build as you transcend in particular the egoic aspects of emotions. But I'm also going to, as I said, go through some, like what I'm calling 4 kind of steps. You could tell I like steps and lists, or 4 steps in relating to, and what I'm going to be talking about here is relating to difficult emotions, right? Relating to what is also sometimes called afflictive emotions. The kalisas, as the Buddha would call them, are often translated as the defilements. So I'm really going to really talk about how we can relate to that in kind of the four steps to it. So these are, when we talk about what the Buddha called defilements, we're really talking about mind states or emotions that are based on greed, ill will, and ignorance or delusion. What the Buddha would also call the unwholesome mind states, like anger, frustration, impatience, greed, and so on. These kinds of unwholesome mind states or afflictive emotions. So the 4 steps I'm going to go through are, I'll mention all 4, and then I'll go through them one by one. We have to start by recognizing that a difficult emotion has arisen. A crucial step. If we're not recognizing it, there's not much. We're just kind of caught up and swept away by it. So this is, and I'm going to talk quite a bit about this step because sometimes the step that gets missed in discussing emotions. The second step is acceptance of the mind state or emotion. So not resisting. The third is discerning whether the emotion is wholesome or unwholesome, whether it's a wholesome mind state or an unwholesome mind state. And then the fourth is not identifying with the emotion, so seeing its impersonal nature. So I'm putting that as the fourth step, but I'm also saying that you can just really start with that, with that step, as I did with thoughts. I simply talked about their impersonal nature. But with the emotions tend to have some juice to them, right? And they're basically thoughts that have morphed into some kind of physical manifestation. It's by definition, we're often kind of caught up in it. So a crucial step is recognizing or acknowledging, I guess you could say, that an afflictive emotion has arisen. Right? It's surprising how often afflictive emotions can just be under the surface, not acknowledged or recognized. We can only work with them and understand them if we recognize them first. And we'll talk a bit more about that. So one important way that we can recognize difficult emotions is to be present in the body, right? For me, this is the telltale for me when I notice a difficult emotion, an afflictive emotion, and I immediately feel something in the body, right? Some tightness, some tension, some contraction in the body. And the more you practice with emotions, the more you become aware of where different emotions, manifest, come about in the body. It just becomes natural. Oh, I'm feeling this tightness in my head. That means that this emotion has arisen, or I feel a contraction in my stomach. This tells me that this emotion, an afflictive emotion, has arisen. So it's so crucial that we know that an afflictive emotion has arisen. But I'll just give you an example of how they can kind of hide out and not be recognized. And I think I've probably told this story. I know I've told this story here before, but it's instructive about how we can miss emotions. And I was at a retreat, and I'd been practicing for quite some time. I knew, how to practice and, to be with what arises and so on. And we were doing a lot of, and if you go to a meditation retreat, you do, sitting practice and then walking practice. And there's a particular way of doing walking practice. And I was being very aware of, placing my foot, lifting my foot, the foot hovering, placing, lifting, hovering, placing, just, lifting, hovering, placing as I was walking out to do the walking meditation, which is usually done in a lane, right? It's a lane that's maybe 10 feet long, and you just walk back and forth in the same spot. It's typically how we practice formal walking meditation. So I was doing my lifting, placing, just sensing in step by step. And I noticed there was somebody in my walking space that I've been walking in for over a week now. I've been walking in the same place. Somebody's in my lifting, placing, sensing, lifting. So somebody's in my place. Oh, what are they doing? The thought of what are they doing in my walking lane? Did I do something to offend? Did I cut them off in the food line? Maybe I cut them off in the food line, and this is how they're getting back at me. And I'm lifting, placing, sensing, lifting. On I went, and then another thought came up, and they must have seen me by now after over a week that this is where I walk every. So what are they doing there? This is not right. Lifting, placing, sensing, lifting, placing, sensing. And then, so these kinds of thoughts just kept coming up, and I was lifting, totally aware of lifting, placing, sensing. As these thoughts came up and up and up. And what I didn't notice was that anger was present. Right? I was in the present moment, lifting, sensing, placing each step, each foot, lifting my foot, sensing into that. Thoughts would arise, but what I didn't notice was there was tension in the body. There was anger present. And it was there, but I was in a very mindful space, but I was completely oblivious to the anger that had arisen. And when we're not aware, we don't recognize, acknowledge, then the stories just continually feed the afflictive emotion, right? It was just feeding it and feeding it. In fact, I eventually had no choice but to notice it, because I was, starting to get quite agitated by the whole experience. So just to be aware that, these emotions can kind of float, even, when we're being very mindful, they can kind of hide out in the background. And we really want to recognize them before they get too intense, I guess you could say, to really see them as they're arising as best we can. And as I said, the one way to do that is to recognize them in the body, seeing them arising in the body. Another way to recognize a difficult or afflictive emotion is to notice when you're kind of feeling out of sorts, kind of just don't feel right, kind of ill at ease. Something's a bit off. So you're not kind of in the easy flow of what's unfolding in life. Or perhaps there's a lot of obsessive thoughts, that's creating some unease. This can be another signal to really look and see. It can be kind of a mindfulness bell in a sense, just like the body. We can look and see, well, what's behind this sense of unease? What's behind it? And usually when we look, we see that there's some kind of afflictive emotion that has arisen. And it might be some unacknowledged fear or anxiety that's arisen. But when we see it, we recognize it. That's a very important first step to understanding and relating to it. We really have to see it and understand it. About I guess it'd be about 20 years ago, we moved. We lived in the countryside, and we moved to the city. We'd been in the country, living in the country our children spent all their time growing up in the country. We moved to the city, and part of the idea was to create some equity in a house for retirement. So the idea was to build a big house and then sell it sometime later. So I was participating in designing and building this house. And every time I would go to the house, my mind would be going all over the place with thoughts, just these kind of obsessive thinking that would be going on. And I just felt out of sorts. I didn't quite know what was going on, right? It just kind of feeling off. Finally, I said to myself, what's going on here? I just kind of paused and said, okay, what's going on? What's happening? I just kind of asked that question. And what I saw was that I was feeling very self-conscious about having a big house. I didn't feel like I needed this big house. It didn't fit with my ideas about the society and environment and so on. So I just felt there was this kind of real self-conscious or almost embarrassment about having this house. Once I realized this, that feeling, it was okay. It was okay that the feeling was, it's okay to have that feeling. I don't have to change our plan. We still need money for retirement. But once I recognized the feeling, I could just go, okay, yeah, so this feeling's arising. It's still a good plan. It was still a good retirement plan. So things were just okay. It was fine at that moment. But before I recognized the emotion that was present, it was really driving a lot of uneasiness that I was feeling. And I couldn't accept it until I recognized it. Right? When it was just hiding under the surface, it couldn't be accepted. So this really showed for me the power of kind of bringing clarity, recognizing what we're feeling moment by moment. And this sense of uneasiness or can arise when we're doing something too. We may be about to maybe saying something to some people or in a conversation, and a sense of uneasiness may arise. We can see, well, what is there an afflictive emotion? Is there greed or ill will at some level underlying what is being said or being done? Perhaps we're talking about somebody and gossiping, and we may have a sense that something doesn't feel right. Again, sensing and really using your intuition in this way to really sense into when things feel off, and recognizing and just pausing and saying, okay, what's here is really important in recognizing what emotions might be present. Because if we don't see what's underneath, we just simply remain caught by the emotion. So clear recognition of whatever emotion is present is critical, and particularly difficult emotions, because they're causing us intense suffering in many cases. So that's the clear recognition. Step 2 is acceptance. Acceptance of the afflictive emotion or difficult emotion. So what does acceptance mean in terms of a difficult emotion? So a great telltale for me when I'm not accepting is really a felt sense of struggle, that I'm struggling. I feel struggle, and I've used this word before in talks. When I feel struggle, the egoic mind is struggling with something. It means that something is happening that I'm not accepting. So that's a real telltale for me. In meditation, we may feel this. You may feel struggle in your meditation. Right? So do you ever get that sense when you're meditating that there's a struggle that's going on? It could be a real indicator that there's something that that's not being accepted. So instead of getting caught up in being a struggler and just continuing to struggle, we can let that be a signal that there's something that's not being accepted. It may be an emotion, it may be pain in the body, it may be a restless mind. It could be any of those things, right? When you feel this sense of struggle, there's something that's not being accepted. So acceptance, it means we're allowing rather than denying or avoiding emotions. We're allowing them. We can learn to relate to them and learn from them. So we're accepting our emotions rather than suppressing them or denying them. And when we open to them, we and investigate them, we can understand them, right? So it's only through accepting them and allowing them that we can investigate and understand our emotions. And by investigation, I don't mean a discursive investigation, a thinking about. It's not by figuring or analyzing. It's not by thinking about. It's about dropping into ourselves to see what's there. Right? We just kind of drop in to see what's present. And we see when we do this, we can, what is there simply reveals itself. Right? So you don't need to figure out, you simply drop in, just check in, what's here? Like with the uneasiness around the house, stop and go, what's present here? What's here? I'm not analyzing, just what's here, dropping into myself. We sense into the felt sense of it in the body. We talk about that a lot with difficult emotions. We see the story or the thoughts that perpetuate the emotion. This is part of investigating, just seeing what's present. What's the story? Okay. When you have an emotion, you can always see the story that's feeding it, right? Have you ever noticed that? If there's a difficult emotion, you can just look to the mind. You don't have to dig around or do any analysis at all. You just look at the mind and say the thought. And once you just bring awareness to the mind in that way, to the thought, to the story, it's pretty obvious. But until we bring acceptance and that kind of awareness to it, it just goes on and on and on, almost, unconsciously. When I was practicing in India, practiced for some months there, and did a lot of meditation and a lot of yoga. And there was the place where we were, there was a lot of noise. Seemed like there was construction everywhere. There were vendors selling, during my morning meditation, I think people tried to sell everything you might want to eat for your early meal out of a cart with a bicycle and a cart, and would come by, and it seemed to me they'd always want to sit right in front of my room and ring their bell and yell about what they were selling. And I, of course, couldn't understand the language, but so it was a lot of noise, especially if it felt like during my meditation. And I kind of was trying to be open and accepting of it. But when I looked, what I found was I had what I called whiny mind. I don't know if it's a label I gave it. I called it whiny mind. And what I was doing is I was whining. Kind of under the surface, there was this complaining or whining that was going on. Why are they doing? Why it's disturbing my so on. And so it's just this whining. So I gave it the label whining mind. And once I noticed it and labeled it that way, it could accept it and it could dissipate, right? There's whiny mind. As soon as it arose, it's whiny mind's arising. It could self-liberate it. Just when I was noticing whiny mind. So we need to recognize and accept what is present. So I recognized that whining, accepted it. This is whiny mind arising. And then it could dissipate, dissolve, transform, liberate. So we also, so we're really on the lookout for thoughts that can trigger difficult emotions, right? The thought trains, the stories. And it's when you look at this over a period of time, it's quite amazing how a single thought can trigger a difficult emotion. Sometimes I even like to play around with this. I don't know if this is something that intrigues you, but you can actually do this. You can sit and just produce a thought and watch how it can produce an emotion. And just play around with just a single thought. Whatever shouldn't be happening. Huh? Watch an emotion start to arise. That person shouldn't be doing X. Watch an emotion arise. Just this. Of course, as soon as you see the emotion, it can dissipate. So it's not like I want you to spin a story and get yourself all, upset. But you can just actually see the amazing process of how a single thought, can produce an emotion, just like that. Think a thought and see an emotion arise. Bang, just like one right after the other. Is quite an amazing thing to see. And actually doing that exercise can be helpful in actually seeing it in your direct experience. The power of the thoughts that get produced by the mind. Often just by recognizing and accepting that a difficult emotion is present allows it to dissolve. Right? This is because when we're mindful, right? Acceptance is really another way to say we're mindful. Right? Because when we're accepting it, we're by definition mindful. When we're mindful of the emotion, the story's no longer playing itself out. Right? How can you be noting and being mindful that whiny mind has arisen? It's just mindfulness there's no space for whining to continue, because your consciousness is present, is mindful of what's arising moment by moment. We'll move on. Oh, just to say too that when we open our awareness to thoughts and feelings, we may discover some emotions that are overwhelming. And this can be based on past trauma, all sorts of things in our lives. So, although I say that not resisting and accepting emotions is healing, but it needs to be done in a gentle and balanced way. So often we maybe have to titrate our exposure, or an opening to the difficult emotion. We may not just completely accept and open, but we may have to, at some point say, "Oh, this is overwhelming in this moment. I'm going to, go for a run, or I'm going to do something else that disperses this energy, and I'll come back to it another day." So I'd just like to point that out, and really to use our own internal intelligence to let us know when that's appropriate. Mm-hmm. So the third is discernment. So the Buddha often spoke about unwholesome mind states around greed, hatred, and delusion, as I mentioned, and wholesome mind states as being non-greed, non-aversion, and non-delusion. So non-greed is, generosity, and renunciation as well. Non-aversion means it's not carrying ill will. So the opposite is loving kindness, and non-delusion means we're really just seeing things as they are, which is wisdom. So one way on this path is to increase the wholesome states and decrease the unwholesome states. And we've talked about all those practices where we incline the mind towards loving kindness, appreciative joy, equanimity, compassion, and so on, and other practices where we cultivate generosity and wisdom. The whole practice of offering dana for the teachings is the practice of a wholesome mind state of generosity. So these we're discerning which mind state has arisen. We're recognizing, accepting, and we're discerning. This is a wholesome mind state. This is an unwholesome mind state, and we're really carefully cultivating and inclining the mind towards what we notice as the wholesome mind states. Be careful that discernment doesn't morph into self-judgment, right? It's anger has arisen as opposed to I am an angry person, right? We're discerning an unwholesome mind state, that an unwholesome mind state has arisen so that we can understand it, not so that we can, judge ourselves for having had it. We've all had them all, right? We've all had all the unwholesome mind states and the wholesome mind states. So if an unwholesome mind state arises, it's not like you're the first person to have that unwholesome mind state. Just recognize that when it's present. So I'm going to jump ahead to not identifying with the difficult emotions, so seeing its impersonal nature. And in many ways, we can start there, as I said, to see the difficult emotion as not self, that it's no self. So we're not identifying with the emotions arising. We're knowing that our true nature is the presence that's always already and always there, behind the emotion, in the background of the emotion. So you can go directly to this step, and is kind of a more direct path, and practice from this view. So we're kind of putting right view, as the Buddha did in the Eightfold Path. He put right view at the beginning of the Eightfold Path, which I've always found interesting. He could have put all the ethical practices first. Right view, right thought, right intention, right up front. So I think we can start with right view. Go and see that emotions are not the problem. They're natural. Difficult emotions are natural. Collective emotions are natural. The problem is how we deal with them. We all have these emotions. It's part of being human. So why claim it as a me or an I? Right? Why claim it? It just adds to the suffering. So can we learn not to take emotions so personally? I wasn't going to do this session. I wasn't part of the schedule because I was just going to talk about thoughts. But then I kind of understood why people, raised emotion, because, emotions feel personal, right? And we get the persistent emotional visitors, the ones that keep coming up for us. And I've mentioned impatience for me. Impatience was a persistent visitor. In fact, I went shopping today for the first time in, I don't know, a year and a half. I needed some clothes, right? So I went shopping, and there's a lot of people shopping on a Thursday. I asked Mike, I said, is today a work day or a weekday? Because it seems like a weekend day. But there were so many people shopping. But anyway, that's not the point of the story. I had to get into a lineup to try some clothes on. And I haven't practiced with impatience for a while. I haven't felt it. And I noticed this little twinge of impatience arise. I thought, whoa, it's there it is again. It's not interesting, but it's impatient. It's impatience arising. Joseph Goldstein likes to point out there's a real difference between saying, I am X. So as you use my example of impatience, there's a real difference between saying, I am impatient, and saying impatience is present, or impatience has arisen. Right? One is claiming an I, the self is claiming it as part of it, of who it is, its identity. The other is just recognizing that recognizing it, accepting it, that it's present. And I notice though it's not such a wholesome state. It doesn't feel like a wholesome mind state. So can we learn to not take emotions so personally? Can we see that they'll go away because they are impermanent? Right? That's the good news side of impermanence, is that the difficult emotions go away. Right? The bad news of impermanence is that the taste of the taste of the chocolate ice cream goes away. Right? But the good news is that the difficult emotion will go away. And the only way to make a difficult emotion stick around a little longer, do you know how to do that? Don't accept it. Resist it. Try it. Next time you have, not a big difficult emotion, but a little one, like I had that impatience. Next time, actually, when I feel impatience arise, I'm going to resist it just to see what happens. Try to get rid of it. I'll try all my tricks to try and get rid of it, right? Dharma teachers, we've gone through a lifetime of tricks to try and get rid of things without even knowing it, right? And we've slowly realized that we've been practicing a lot of struggle and resistance. But I'll try it and see what happens. But try that with a difficult emotion. Seeing the only way you can make a difficult emotion stick around is by resisting it. Isn't that interesting? And once you see that, wow, you can start to see, well, what's the opposite of resisting? It's accepting. So I think that's need to know that this is not who we are. We're not our old pain. We don't need to construct a self around the ego and its struggles. Right? We don't have to identify with these emotions. We can see them as ephemeral and personal, and we can see and accept our old pain and memories, our conditioning. It's arising from our conditioning, causes and conditions. But when we're not identified with our old pain, and we don't see it as a sense of me, and we see thoughts and emotions as just arising, they can dissolve and release. The impermanent nature of them allows them to dissolve and release. It's not anything you do. It's just what they do when the ego's not resisting. So painful emotions, difficult emotions can come, but they're divested from a sense of self. So we're not identifying with the emotions. So again, just like thoughts, they're just like clouds that are passing through. We're letting go of any resistance to feeling them. So just the simple rephrasing can be helpful. Anger is present. Frustration is present. Fear is present. As opposed to, I am angry, I am frustrated, I am fearful. Anger is present. So just to conclude, when a difficult emotion arises, can we see it as a gift? So it's kind of a mind shift, right? Can we, your anger has arisen, fear has arisen, anxiety has arisen. Can we see it as a gift? The Dharma gift. I think the Buddha said, your enemies are, you practice with your enemies are like teachers that have been sent to you to help you on the path. Can we see it as an opportunity to practice and to transform, to see no self directly in our direct experience? They're Dharma gifts. Nobody became enlightened without difficult emotions. You need them. You need them to transform. No one became enlightened without having a busy mind. They understood busy mind, but they saw it for what it is. They saw the no self nature of difficult emotion and busy mind. So we all have this wisdom within us, or just simply it's a matter of calling it forth. And it may sound difficult, but try it in practice. When a difficult emotion visits, can you say to yourself, I welcome this difficult emotion as Dharma practice. I welcome this difficult emotion as Dharma practice. It is, in fact, our teacher. The Dalai Lama says we should honor our enemies because they're our teachers. He's got so many stories to illustrate this, which I won't go into them, but I'm sure many of you have heard some of his stories. Treatment in Tibet. So, but how often do we think of this? To honor difficult emotions as Dharma practice. We're often so caught up in the emotion, right? So when we're caught up in anger, do we stop and reflect in this way? Not unless we practice doing it, right? We have to practice doing this. The more we practice it, the more we practice, being with our afflictive emotions in this way, it's not as difficult as it sounds. So instead of being caught and lost in the emotion and identified with it, we can understand and practice with it. It can become kind of our inner Dharma teacher, right? These emotions that arise. And second, when we reflect on how insignificant perhaps a difficult emotion is within the whole scheme of things, right? We can get caught up in a fairly narrow mindset. The ego has a very narrow mindset, right? It doesn't think in a larger context in terms of the larger space of human beings. So by looking at emotions in this way, we can create some space, at least some inner space, and place it within the larger context, the whole scheme of things. So I'll stop it there. I leave some time for some questions.